Socialism, the boogeyman of American politics. Despite the rise of self-proclaimed socialist politicians such as Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the public perception of socialism remains very harsh. Unfortunately, the definition of socialism is so muddled that it's difficult to discern what your views on socialism really are. Past its connections to some questionable historical figures and lazy liberals looking for handouts, not a lot of people seem to understand what it really means. Today, we're going to be taking a look at what socialism really is, and why the modern Democratic Party hasn't even begun to breach the surface of it. Welcome to Explain in Minecraft. I'm going to be taking you through political, philosophical, and who knows what else kind of topics throughout the course of the series. If you're interested, make sure to subscribe for more content like this. Thanks.
He was not a Russian, but a German. His native Prussia threw him out. France did the same, so he spent most of his life in England. He never lived in Russia, but his thinking lives there yet. His name was Karl Marx. His vision was narrow and fanatic, and in several ways simply unrealistic. But it was intense. In 1848, Marx and a fellow Prussian named Engels wrote a small book which was to have a large effect on world history. Its opening words were perhaps more prophetic than even its authors knew. A specter is haunting Europe. The specter of communism.
To find the real definition of socialism, we're going to need to take it back. Like way back. Like all the way back to... One of the first instances of socialism was created by a man named Robert Owen. Owen was a Welsh businessman who specialized in the field of textile manufacturing. When he took over ownership of a large textile mill in New Lanark, Scotland, he realized a very important conflict in the mill's practices and his own philosophy. Owen believed in the relatively uncommon materialist conception of birth. That sounds a lot more complicated than it is. Owen just believed that people's personalities and traits came from their genetics as well as their environment. But mills in his day treated their workers terribly. Owen thought that if the environment of his workers was bad, their moral character would be too. So he sought out to improve the working conditions of the New Lanark mill, and it was a resounding success. World leaders from all over Europe came to visit the ingeniously profitable machine that was the Owen mill. A population originally consisting of the most diverse and, for the most part, very demoralized elements. A population that gradually grew to 2,500, he turned into a model colony, in which drunkenness, police, magistrates, lawsuits, poor laws, charity were unknown. And all this simply by placing the people in conditions worthy of human beings. But that wasn't enough for Owen. He believed in the inherent humanity of his workers, and he saw that they still weren't doing well enough for what he believed to be the right conditions for human beings. And then it came to him. What should have been going to the workers to live in the right conditions was actually going to him and the other owners of the mill. To them, therefore, the fruits of this new power belonged. The newly created gigantic productive forces, hitherto used only to enrich individuals and to enslave the masses, offered to Owen the foundations for a reconstruction of society. They were destined, as the common property of all, to be worked for the common good of all. Socialism. Socialism was the answer for Robert Owen's dilemma. Owen wanted the fruits of the workers' labor to go to them. He wanted the workers to own the means of production themselves instead of selling their labor and time to the capitalist owners of whatever company they happen to be employed in. Socialism is when the workers own the means of production. The means of production are the factories, the farms, the land, the tools, the machinery, the materials, everything needed in order to produce the desired product. But according to Frederick Engels, one of the founders of modern socialist and communist thought, Robert Owen and other socialists of the time didn't understand the empirical foundations behind socialism. Owen was driven by his morals, seeing the conditions his workers lived in because they didn't collectively own the factory. But Karl Marx started to take it in a different direction in the 1840s. Engels, in his book Socialism, Utopian and Scientific, outlines the differences between the Owenites and the Jacobins and various other socialist groups preceding him by separating the socialist ideology into two different camps. As I'm sure you can guess, Engels labeled the socialists of the past utopians, the ones who were working towards a utopia just because it would be pretty nice. Engels saw himself and Marx, however, as scientific socialists. Their analysis of capitalism provided a genuinely scientific basis for its dysfunctions and collapse. If you want to take a look at what that analysis of capitalism was, check the link in the top right. But for now, we're just going to stay on the topic of socialism. I really recommend you check it out though. Marx's critique of capitalism is what really brings everything about socialism and communism together. So back to socialism. How does it work? Socialism manifests itself in many ways, depending on which methods and ideologies you subscribe to, but Vladimir Lenin's transitionary period between capitalism and communism is the most common image people have of it. Lenin described a society in which a group of working-class militants would rise up and incite the revolution against capitalism, establishing the working class's full control over the government. This is called the dictatorship of the proletariat. The group of workers, called a vanguard party, would then take control of all industries and production and suppress the upper classes and counter-revolutionaries who might try to sabotage the socialist overthrow. This is socialism and Marxist-Leninism, one of the prevailing ideologies of the past century. Another way socialism can manifest itself is in a market economy. It's important to remember that socialism and markets aren't mutually exclusive. Market socialism is a form of socialism that organizes workers into separate enterprises and companies, just like we have today. The only difference is that these companies would be democratic, so that the workers within the company would own the means of production they work with. This means no more bosses and managers. Instead, companies would be run through a democratic process that allows all its workers to have a say. So far we've covered two forms of socialism, Marxist-Leninist socialism and market socialism, but I'm sure you're wondering how some of your favorite politicians play into this. Is Bernie Sanders socialist? How is Medicare for All a socialist policy? This is where we get into some pretty confusing territory, so stay with me here. Socialism in the modern political climate sometimes refers to a system called social democracy. Social democracy is an economic and political system that basically functions the way we do now with a few changes. First, wealth redistribution is higher. This means that, whichever way the government decides to do it, there's something in place that tries its best to make everyone a little more equal, like a progressive income tax. Second, welfare programs. This includes stuff like public education, Medicare for All, food stamps, and basically anything that would normally be left up to a private company. Lastly, unions. Social democracy is a big fan of collective bargaining, or the workers' ability to all get in a group and force their employer to pay them more or make their work conditions better. It's important to remember that socialism and social democracy are two different things. Especially today, be careful to call the nationalization of an industry socialism. When the government doesn't represent the workers, nationalization can't technically be socialist. If the workers don't own the means of production, it's not socialism. So that's socialism, a society in which the workers own the means of production. Various means are used to enact this from Leninism to market socialism, but overall, socialism is about one thing: the workers' right to the fruits of their labor. Let me know what kind of videos you guys want to see in the future and what else you want me to explain down in the comments. Are you a socialist and just came here to see how accurate my description was? Maybe you hate socialism and want to yell at me for even talking about it. Let me know down in the comment section. Thanks for watching. This is Explained in Minecraft.
I need an arm and leg. I need an arm and head. Carti and Laughlan, leg. Arm and leg. Head and chest. Arm and leg. Head and chest. Carti and Laughlan, bread. Carti can't fuck.